This was the scene in a Minneapolis courtroom as the prosecution heard the words they had been waiting for. A jury convicting former police officer Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd. Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes last May as Floyd begged for air and called for his mother. Chauvin found guilty on all 3 charges, the most serious, second-degree unintentional murder, which carries a maximum sentence of 40 years. His bail immediately revoked. Chauvin then led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His sentencing set for 8 weeks from now. One of Floyd's brothers saying he's relieved.
Today, we are able to breathe again.
Communities all across the country gathering, hugging each other to mark this moment of accountability they fought for nearly a year. We have team coverage this morning. Mara Sirianni following the continued calls for change that extend far beyond this one verdict. But let's start with Liza Lucas. She has more now on what's next for Derek Chauvin.
Well, as you mentioned, Sheba, Chauvin is currently back in jail awaiting sentencing. That sentencing process is expected to take place in 8 weeks. And under the current charges, Chauvin could face a maximum up to 40 years in prison. But there is a lot of discretion. There's going to be quite a range, a big discussion being had when it comes to these charges. And that's because under Minnesota's sentencing guidelines, there's quite a bit of discretion for the judge. And he's going to consider things such as no criminal history. Also, the prosecution asking in this case for him to look at what is called aggravating factors.
A few of them are present in this case. One of them is whether children were present for the crime. Another is whether the defendant was in a position of authority and abused that authority. A third relevant one is whether the victim was in a vulnerable position.
Again, that sentencing expected to take place in the next 2 months. And it's also important to note that in Minnesota, that 2/3 of the sentence is served in prison, the rest under parole. Sheba.
All right, Liza, thank you. And as we wait to learn Chauvin's sentence, activists say they will not let the momentum slip. They marched in Atlanta last night, many of them happy they could mark this verdict here, but they shared with us over and over again the names of other Black men and women whose cases still have their full attention.
We're still on the front line for Oscar Kane. We're still on the front line for Jamarian Robinson. We're still on the front line for so many others here locally. But Atlanta, Georgia does have a police brutality problem, and this whole system has to change.
Mara Sirianni joining us live from the state capitol this morning with much more on this. Mara, what are the next steps for activists after this trial? What are they focused on?
Well, Sheba, as we know here in Atlanta, the city was really on edge waiting for this verdict to come down. Now activists are hoping that this decision in the George Floyd case will set the tone for other cases, specifically right here at home. So shortly after the announcement yesterday, we caught up with Atlanta trial attorney, civil rights attorney Gerald Griggs, and he says this is about standing in solidarity, of course, with the families in Minnesota, but also with the families right here in Georgia. Griggs pointed to the cases of Vincent Truitt, Rayshard Brooks, Jimmy Atkinson, and Oscar Kane, just to name a few, and he says the fight is far from over.
It sends a message to the rest of the DAs around the country that it's time to start trying these cases, not just sending them to grand juries and hoping, but actually getting an indictment and then trying it full term to a jury that will speak the truth. There is a George Floyd in every town, and it's time for the justice system to understand that.
And now, due to COVID, of course, many of these local cases have kind of been put on hold for the time being. But Griggs says once the courts open back up, once things get moving again, he says it will certainly be full steam ahead.
Yeah, we are certainly getting that feeling here, Mara. Thank you. And the calls for justice and accountability reaching Capitol Hill. President Biden urging Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The bill would ban police chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and end immunity for officers.
I can't breathe. Those are George Floyd's last words. We can't let those words die with him.
Democrats who sponsored the bill say it would be just the first step toward change. And Francesca, I want to circle back here because it is everyday people who are affected here, right? When we see these acts of violence, a lot of us just standing there, right? Not sure what to do here. And when they have these videos to watch over and over again, when this verdict came down, we saw so many mixed reactions. people still trying to process how they should feel about this. Should they take the moment in, or should they continue to move forward here?
How can you when other acts are happening that same day, Sheba? And so many people told us that they're hopeful that this will be a turning point for change in this country. But still, we see that frustration, that sadness. And as I just mentioned, on the same day, the same verdict as George Floyd, or as Derek Chauvin, rather, getting his verdict, we have another senseless killing. Now, 11 Alive.
Find the defendant guilty.
I'm thankful because I was so worried that if it had come back as anything less than guilty, that it was going to be an uprising.
The verdict is really serving as an inspiration for some people of minorities to have hope that the system will be changed.
20 years from now, I could just look back and I can just say that I was actually a part of his legacy, that my generation is part of history.
We're on the right track to equity.
I don't want us to be happy over crumbs, because it's a crumb. And that's the truth.
Bringing in my colleagues here. Now, the music here sounds very uplifting, but the reality is that young girl just said at the end, this is crumbs. The fact that the threshold for accountability for Black people in this country and the threshold for justice for Black people in this country is so low that we get excited that accountability has just been served is pretty sad. Now, of course, when we found out about the verdict yesterday, I was completely thrilled, but we have to see this through. Just as Joe Ripley's report says that the George Floyd Policing Reform Act needs to pass, change has to happen, systemic racism in this country has to end for things to get better.
I think that's absolutely right. One case is not going to make up for all the injustices that have been taking place, and they're still going. So I absolutely agree with you, Francesca.
I would have to disagree and not call it crumbs. You know, I grew up with a father who was raised in Jim Crow South. And he has taught me over the years, as we're navigating through this new social justice movement here, that change is slow, right? It doesn't mean that it's okay that it's slow, but it is change and it's happening. I think it's important for us to take in this moment, really take it in, and then move forward as well. I want to share with you a tweet I put out yesterday because there are so many emotions that we're feeling, and I don't really feel like relief sums it all up, right? I think it's more than relief. It feels like we matter, like we're being listened to. For many of us, it was an immediate rush back in time to when we all watched George Floyd be murdered, and we can call it murder now. Watch him take his last breaths under an officer's knee. It's been too much. And I think for a lot of us, we are finally able to breathe because we see the sky opening up a little bit, right? So I think we need to take this moment and move forward with it.
Absolutely, Sheba. We all know the name George Floyd. Do you know the name Arthur McDuffie? I do. It was in 1980. I grew up in Miami, Florida, when he was beaten and killed by 4 white officers. I watched my city burn for weeks to come. 18 people killed, 400 injured. Yeah. I didn't get it. I was 14 years old. 1992, Rodney King, we all saw that. We know the outcome. We saw those riots. I thought I got it. Right now, 2021, 40 plus years later, to watch the knee on George Floyd's neck, that was murder. That man was killed. Now I get it, 40 years later as a white man. But this has been going on for 400 years. One small step, maybe, but a lot more to go.
A lot more to go.
A lot more to go.
That we can agree on. Right now, you can find our full coverage of the conviction of Derek Chauvin on the 11 Alive app, and we welcome you into this conversation as well. The entire team has put some information up on their social media pages, also on the 11 Alive Facebook page and Morning Rush ATL page. So please let us know your thoughts as well. We have full interviews with community leaders on 11alive.com. And please remember, share your thoughts also on Twitter using the hashtag Morning Rush ATL.